Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
The pages of history are often written by the victors, those with the power to shape narratives, define identities, and construct societal hierarchies. Yet, in the shadowy corners of the past lie stories of people whose very existence was rewritten to suit shifting political, economic, and social objectives. Among them are the black-skinned indigenous tribes of the Americas, native peoples with deep roots in the land, whose identities were systematically erased and reclassified as mulatto through a combination of colonial policies, legal redefinitions, and racial ideology. Their story is one of survival, resilience, and the unrelenting force of history that sought to strip them of their heritage while they fought to preserve it. Before European contact, the indigenous peoples of the Americas were incredibly diverse, with a wide range of physical features, languages, and cultures. Early accounts by explorers and settlers document the existence of dark-skinned indigenous populations across North, Central, and South America. Some of these communities were the result of ancient migrations from Africa or Oceania, while others simply represented the natural diversity of Native American peoples. Historical records describe indigenous tribes in the Carolinas, the Gulf Coast, the Caribbean islands, and even parts of Mexico and South America with distinctly African-like features, leading some early European observers to speculate about African influences in the pre-Columbian Americas. One of the earliest European reports of dark-skinned Native Americans came from Spanish explorers like Vasco Núñez de Balboa and Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, who encountered people they described as Black Indians in Central and South America. Similarly, English and French explorers in North America reported finding indigenous groups with dark skin, tightly coiled hair, and broad facial features, which diverged from the stereotypical image of the Red Indian promoted by European settlers. As European powers sought to expand their control over the New World, they implemented systems of racial classification that did not account for the existing diversity among indigenous peoples. The Spanish, for example, developed the casta system, which ranked individuals based on their racial ancestry, favoring those of European descent while marginalizing those with African or Native American heritage. Under this system, anyone with dark skin was often classified as a mulatto, a term used to describe individuals of mixed African and European ancestry, or mestizo, a mix of European and Native American ancestry, regardless of their actual lineage. In British North America, a similar process unfolded. Colonial governments and census takers often categorized dark-skinned Native Americans as Negro or mulatto, effectively erasing their indigenous identity. This was particularly common in states like Virginia, the Carolinas, and Louisiana, where racial laws were designed to separate white settlers from both Africans and Native Americans. The infamous one-drop rule, which dictated that any person with even a trace of African ancestry was legally considered black, further contributed to the misclassification of dark-skinned indigenous peoples. Over time, many native tribes who had maintained their identities for centuries found themselves legally redefined out of existence. Among the most well-documented cases of indigenous peoples being reclassified as mulatto are the Seminoles, the Lumbee, and various Afro-Indigenous communities in the Caribbean. The Seminoles of Florida, a Native American group of Creek descent, had long accepted runaway African slaves into their communities. Over generations, intermarriage led to the development of a unique Afro-Indigenous culture. However, colonial and later U.S. officials often classified Seminoles with darker skin as mulatto or Negro, stripping them of their native identity in official records. The Lumbee people of North Carolina, another indigenous community with dark-skinned members, were subject to similar reclassification. Although they maintained Native American traditions and resisted assimilation, their dark complexion led many government officials to categorize them as free people of color or mulatto rather than as indigenous. In the Caribbean, dark-skinned indigenous communities such as the Garifuna of St. Vincent and the Caribs of Dominica were frequently reclassified as people of African descent. This erasure was partly driven by colonial authorities who sought to justify land seizures by claiming that these groups were not truly indigenous. The systematic reclassification of black-skinned Native Americans had profound consequences. By being labeled as mulatto or Negro, these communities were often denied the legal rights and protections afforded to recognized indigenous tribes. They lost access to ancestral lands, were excluded from treaties, and in many cases were subjected to the same discriminatory laws that governed African-descended peoples in the Americas. This erasure also had cultural repercussions. Many Afro-Indigenous communities struggled to maintain their traditions in the face of forced assimilation, segregation, and systemic discrimination. Over time, some groups were absorbed into African American or Latino identities, further obscuring their native heritage. Despite centuries of misclassification, many descendants of these reclassified tribes continue to fight for recognition of their indigenous heritage. Some have sought legal recognition as Native American tribes, while others have worked to revive cultural traditions and oral histories that affirm their unique identities. In recent years, DNA studies and historical research have begun to shed new light on the complex racial and ethnic landscape of the Americas. Scholars and activists have increasingly challenged the colonial narratives that sought to erase the existence of black-skinned indigenous peoples, advocating for a more inclusive understanding of Native American identity. The history of the black-skinned Native tribes who were reclassified as mulatto is a testament to the power of colonial systems to reshape identities and erase entire peoples from official records. Yet, it is also a story of survival, resilience, and the enduring fight for recognition. As more research emerges and as Afro-Indigenous communities continue to reclaim their histories, the true diversity of the indigenous Americas will come to light, challenging the rigid racial classifications imposed by colonial rulers and reaffirming the deep, unbroken connection of these peoples to their ancestral lands.